But we built Siri for Apple's competition. When we saw the iPhone, that was the trigger moment saying, I now know what the world will be 2 years from now. It's time to take this idea I've had on a shelf for ages and bring it to the world for real.
My next guest helped start 4 successful companies. He's the co-founder of Siri, which was then sold to Apple, and now it's on over 2 billion devices. He's also the co-founder of Viv Labs, V-I-V Labs, which was sold to Samsung, and now it's on hundreds of millions of their devices. He's also the co-founder of Sentient, which is a pioneering large-scale machine learning company. And he's a founding member of Change.org, which is the world's largest petition platform with about 500 million members. He's also an award-winning magician who's performed for heads of state and world leaders, for stadiums filled with students, and for Penn and Teller on their show, Penn and Teller's Fool Us. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce to you to this amazing creative entrepreneur whose name is Adam Cheyer. Check it out. Hey Adam, welcome to the Making Magic podcast.
Thanks, Shaun. Glad to be here.
Yes, this is going to be a fun chat, and I think the audience is really going to enjoy this because you've got a lot to share with this show here, just based on your accolades and what you've been up to in your world. So I like to start off every episode with a story, and I always ask my guests to share with me what would be the first thing that you have ever created or made. And I know you're in the software world heavily, so maybe there's a piece of software, and all stories are welcome.
Yeah, I started in the software world way back, long ago in the 80s, when the Rubik's Cube was popular. I was the East Coast champion of the Rubik's Cube in 1982 or something like that. So the first software program I ever wrote was a program to solve Rubik's Cube. So it was kind of a transfer from the mechanics of a cube into the software world and trying to get another machine to be able to figure out how to do that.
So that was your first delve into the whole machine learning concept.
Yeah, it wasn't really machine learning. It was more other aspects of artificial intelligence and specifically search and heuristics. But it was literally the first software program I ever wrote. So it was pretty basic. I mean, and in fact, it was literally written in the programming language BASIC. Lots of if-thens and go-tos. But that was the first thing that I really created in software.
Okay. Yeah, because I was going to ask, was it C++, but BASIC? What is the difference between the two? I am not well-versed in the software world.
They're all about the same. I mean, back then, so BASIC had line numbers, C++ and others didn't. So you would literally say your first statement 10 would be print this, statement 20 would be print this, back to statement 10. So it was very line oriented. Every line had a number, and you had a lot of these go here, go there. So you could write really horrible spaghetti code if you wanted to.
Okay. And what did you learn from making this program, if anything?
I think what I learned was you could create anything that your mind could conceive of. So when I was a kid, I think cardboard used to be my material of choice. I would see a toy on TV in a commercial. I'd say, Ma, can I buy the toy? She'd say, no, but here's a stack of cardboard. It was like the cardboard you would get from a shirt when you dry clean your shirt. So it was white and smooth on one side and gray on the other side. So I could build things with tape and staplers build all sorts of machines and marble, crazy things and whatever. But software let me do that with just ultimate flexibility. Anything I could imagine in my mind, I could build at least a simulation of in software. So that was the lesson, was just how versatile and how I could literally take thought of anything. I could have the architecture of a building. I could have a magic trick. I could do whatever I wanted and bring it into software and make it work. And yeah, that was thrilling for me.
Yeah, due to my lack of software coding knowledge, I don't do as much of it as I want to, but the little bit that I've delved into, like with Arduino coding,
yeah,
you really see that's just lightly scratching the surface. And then something like AI, it's all just math and code and conditional logic. But like you said, if you know how to use it right, you can literally do and build anything. People can shut down whole cities with just coding and.
Oh, absolutely. And you can have software learn to do things that you do not know how to do. I started a whole company about it because at one point I was like, man, it would be great. I'm sitting here scraping by. It'd be great to, make enough money that I could retire or buy a house or things like that. So I said, how should I do it? And I looked up who are the richest people in America. And a huge number of them are hedge fund managers. And I said to myself, that is the highest reward to risk job because they raise money into a fund. It's not their money. And then they have a 2 and 20 model. Their job is to basically bet, to gamble, to make bets in the stock market. If it does really well, they take a 20% cut of profits above a certain amount. And if they do poorly, they take a 2% cut. But if they do horribly and lose all the money, it wasn't their money. I go, man, that is, and it's huge upside and really no downside. Best job. I go, I don't know a thing about finance. I don't know anything about trading the stock market, but I wonder if I could write a program that learns how to trade on the stock market for me through machine learning. I'll say, this is what the inputs were. This is what happened next. Can you learn any patterns? When it's going to go up, when it's going to go down. I didn't even have to understand the rules that it came up with. And yet it ended up becoming a stock trading system that traded hundreds of millions of dollars autonomously without me knowing the first thing about, financial trading. So that it's amazing that anything you can dream of, you can bring to reality. And even some things that you don't know how to do yourself, you can teach a machine to learn how to do it without being a master at it yourself. So I think that's pretty wild.
That's mind-blowing. I mean, I've heard of AI and I've heard of the concept term machine learning, but I didn't know that it was, a person can design something where the machine just kind of goes off on its own. You're saying it just goes off on its own whim and it learns predictable patterns?
Yeah, in most machine learning systems, what you do is you give it training. You say, here is the input and here is the output I want. Here is the input, here's the output I want. And there's math that it will adjust its internal mechanisms to basically learn the rules that if you give this input, I need that output. If I give this input, I need that output. But in most cases, the rules that it comes up with is math at a scale that no human could comprehend. When a neural network learns how to do something, whether it's self-drive a car or predict the stock market, no human can go in and say, oh, this weight is 72 and that one's 49 and make any sense out of it. So it's an interesting quandary with machine learning because if you can formulate the problem, and if you see this, I want this. Like if I see the road go that way, I want you to turn the steering wheel to the left. If I see the road go that way, I want you to turn it to the right. If you can formulate the problem into inputs and outputs and give it a lot of data, it's going to find a way. That's what machine learning does and deep neural networks. It'll find a way to get there. And the human who posed the problem won't understand the solution, which is good and bad in certain ways. You're not going to know when is it right and when is it wrong, or really be able to debug it much, because it's billions of numbers and no human could really make sense of it.
Right, that just at the most basic level for people who don't even have a grasp of any of this, it's kind of like a calculator, like your classic calculator, right? If you punch in numbers, the calculations are instantaneous, and that's just already way ahead of what a normal human can do.
Right, absolutely. And it's got rules into how to do math, a calculator does. And in a machine learning system, it'll have rules that will output, just like the calculator is doing, the result you want given some input. Like, given this input, should I buy, sell, or hold? And it'll tell you one of the three, just like a calculator.
And what was the name of that software program, if it's still around, the stock prediction?
It was a company we started called Sentient.
That was Sentient, okay.
Sentient. It was one of the first large-scale machine learning companies. We had more than 1 million computers, or CPUs, all networked together in a way that we could take these machine learning problems and have it learn the rules on its own to solve certain problems. We applied it to finance, healthcare, agriculture, retail, commerce, all sorts of areas. So it's sort of a generic system that a machine could learn to solve tasks. And at the time, knowing that if you had more computers, you could actually do way, way more, exponentially more. We were one of the earliest to be investigating that.
So you just had a big giant room filled with servers and computers, I guess.
They were spread around the world. We don't have to fit them all into the same room, which is nice.
True, right?
A lot of them in China, actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah, right. Of course. I mean, if it's right, servers can connect to another server anywhere. Duh, I should have known that. So, okay. Yeah, man. Just technology and the way that all works really, like, once people get a grasp on that, it really can free up your human life while you're having your bots or your robots do all these other things. And I was listening to someone talk recently about AI and robots and the future, and he made a really good point. I believe it was a podcast from this guy Naval, and he was talking about freeing your time and passive income related things. And he said the rise of the machines is already here. It's been here much longer than people have thought, and robots, because these computer programs and these predictive programs, that they are doing the same thing as a robot. It's just software. You don't physically see the process. You just see the outcome on your screen.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of everything that happens for us is actually all automated computers, like banking these days.
Yep.
Humans aren't in the loop as money flows at mass scale across the planet, and it's not some human filling out and stamping paper and filing it in cabinets.
Right.
Everything is kind of automated and done through these computers now.
That is fascinating. So with your career spanning the time that it has, starting from ground zero with the Rubik's Cube solving program and going through everything that you've gone through, I always ask every guest, is like, knowing what you know right now, is there any advice that if you could go back in a time machine and visit your earlier self, the early Adam, the early career stage, any advice that you would give them now that you know what you know?
Um, that's a great question. I mean, I'm pretty happy with my journey so far. And a lot of time people will talk about mistakes and failure and things you could have done better. I don't use those terms. So I think I would go back to myself and say more, keep following your passions, do more, think bigger, um, create more. Like, so it's, so I think I was doing those things anyway all along, but I would just go back and tell myself that this creativity and this exploration and curiosity that you have, that's what's going to lead you to everything good in your life. So when I look back on pretty much everything I've created, from Siri, the assistant, to all these technology things, none of them were my day job when I started working on them. And they were all little side projects that no one was paying me to do. I had a day job, but I was working and thinking and building things that I was curious about and that I liked and thought was interesting, even if no one else did at the time. And certainly it wasn't what I was supposed to be doing per se. And then I found ways to take those side projects, if you will, and turn them into my day jobs. So people don't know, they know me as a creator of Siri. When Apple launched it in 2011, my first version of Siri was in 1993. And to give context, the first web browser came out in 1994. So Siri was pre-web. And in fact, Siri was my conception. I said, someday there's going to be content and services around the world, on machines anywhere, even in China, where you're going to want to be able to ask questions and get both tasks solved and knowledge answered. And so the idea of having hyperlinks and documents, meaning web pages, to do that, it's not how I thought of it. I thought everyone would have an assistant, and you could just say, I want to know this or I want to do that. And the assistant's job would be to know where everything was, route your request to the right machines, bring back the results, present them to the user, and help the user get the job done. So for me, Siri, my first version of Siri in 93, was my conception of the web before the web. But it was a side project, a fun thing that I built for fun. And, 15, 17 years later, I started it as a company, took those ideas and those prototypes, the early workings, raised money, and we built a free app in the App Store. We launched it, and 2 weeks later, Steve Jobs calls our office going, hey, it's Steve. Want to come over to my house tomorrow? He said he wanted to buy our company. We said, thank you, not interested, goodbye, and we left. He came back, true story. He came back, and then, we ended up selling our company to Apple, and the rest is sort of history. And then our new version of Siri came out that everyone uses. It's been on 2 billion devices. But how did that start? It was me going, this would be cool. I just want to try this. I think this should exist. No one asking me to do it, no one paying me to do it. I just did it on the side. So I guess the biggest advice I would give my younger self is, do more of those side projects. Create, the importance in your life about building those funny little things that no one even knows what the value is yet. When I look back on my career, that's where everything I'm most proud of started. And so I guess that's the advice I give. So do more of that side curiosity project.
That was actually one of the better answers I've received, because most people say I wouldn't change a thing because I learned, which, I mean, the general summary is of what you said is kind of that, but it was really nice hearing like this roadmap of how you got from point A to point B, and taking us on that journey, which is very important for people to understand. It's a journey that I guess what you're saying here is that these side creative projects, these mini passion projects, is what keeps you going and what drives the innovation.
It is. I mean, people never really think, where did Siri come from? And realize it was 18 years in the making from my first prototype to launch. And I built at least 50 versions over those almost 2 decades, where I did learn and I did improve and I did try different things in order to get to the point where, even though Siri is not everything you'd want it to be, and many of the earlier prototypes did way more than what came out in the original iPhone or what we have today in many ways. But yeah, it's that exploration, creativity, and just passion that I'm exploring it well before there was any voice assistants out on the market. It's just something I was interested in. So yeah, I just feel that it's important to have those projects. I have so many side projects that have not yet come out and seen the light at large scale, but it's not the right time for them. So I'm just kind of waiting for the world to change. Timing is essential. I mean, if you think about it, if I had started Siri as a company any time earlier, or probably much later than I did, it would have failed. But what I did was I created, I innovated, and then I waited for the right moment, and then I hit it spot on. Same thing with change.org. Today, change.org is the world's largest petition platform. We're going to hit 500 million members sometime this year. So it's really an important thing. We started it in 2006 when social networks were just in their earliest day, right? Facebook was still pretty much a university, Harvard University thing. And, and MySpace was just taking off in 2006, but early. But timing it right, that if we're going to have social networks, social activism should have a role. So social network for social activism should exist. And so Ben Rattray and I got together and we started this thing that 15 years later, really matters at a large scale. But it started again as a hobby project. It wasn't a day job. It was a side project, right? And so, that would be my advice to my younger self. Do more of those and value them more, but also know that you can't be impatient. You may have to end up waiting 18 years from your first exploration to when it actually comes out in the world, right? Or change.org, we started in 2006. It wasn't successful for at least 5 years into it, which means we were for 5 years trying, and it was like no user lift. And then all of a sudden it went from 1 million to 10, 10 to 25, 25 to 50, 50 to 100, and went like that. And now we'll be about 500 million. But, sometimes it takes longer than you think to get the traction you think will be so obvious and instant.
Really, really good points there. Like people, the average public looks at a successful person or a successful product or project, they always go, yeah, I've got a great idea and I need the money, so let's release it tomorrow and we'll be rich, right? Generally, that's wrong, right? Most of the time, that's not how it works. You made several great points. Timing, right? Social network was just blossoming. Then you have this social change network that you created to go hand in hand. And I'm willing to bet, Adam, that if you guys started change.org now, for instance, results would be completely different because...
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in catching that wave. It's like a surfer, right? If you're too early or too late, you don't go anywhere. But if you just hit the wave just right, you can ride a long way. And I have a process for that where I make predictions about where I think the world is going. And I work on things to kind of get ready for that. And then when I see what I call it, so those are what I call trends. My predictions are trends or beliefs that I have about the world.
Yep.
And then I look for trigger moments. And when there's a trigger moment that confirms one of my thought about beliefs, now I know it's the time. So with Siri, the trigger moment was the iPhone. The iPhone came out. People at the time said, oh, this is going to be a fad. This is going to fail. Because only a phone company can make something as complex as a phone. Apple makes this little music player thing that's this big. It's so simple. They're not going to be able to pull off a phone, And I saw this and said, oh no, I've been waiting. In fact, I had been predicting that something like apps and mobile is going to come along and take off. Now I know 2 years from now, every handset manufacturer will be desperate to compete with Apple, because Apple's going to be the most popular phone 2 years from now. So what will the competition need? It's, what are the flaws of the iPhone? The screen is small. It's hard to type on that little, it's not even a chiclet keyboard like the BlackBerry. It was soft keyboard, on the screen. And the bandwidth was super slow. Like every click on a web page would take like almost a minute with 3G. And I said, well, what if, 10 clicks for a purchase maybe to get through a purchase flow is like 10 minutes. Like no one's going to do that. What if you could just pick up your phone and in one step without typing, say, get me 2 tickets to the basketball game tomorrow night. And it says done, 1 round trip. That's what the competition needs to beat what will soon be the dominant phone on the market. And then, of course, the irony, as I mentioned, Steve Jobs was the first to see it. And so we built Siri for Apple's competition. When we saw the iPhone, that was the trigger moment saying, I now know what the world will be 2 years from now. It's time to take this idea I've had on a shelf for ages and bring it to the world for real.
That is so many great points you touched on. The biggest, most important thing you said was very much actually like the thinking of Steve Jobs, now that I think about it, because I do remember Steve said, when he was asked about something like why he created the iPhone or why he's creating these other products besides the computer, didn't he say something like, you have to know what the customer needs before they even start looking for it, right? You give the customer what you know they're going to want and need. Basically predicting, like very systematically calculating, like a programmer. Well, if this, then that. If this, then that. So I think if this happens at this time, then that. So, wow, yeah, all conditional logic, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
And that is, that's wild. So what about, what is your most recent project that you have come out with, that you've made?
Well, I won't talk about that one because I always start my companies in stealth mode. So
Understood.
People don't know, Siri means secret in Swahili.
Okay.
And a secret, like a magician, like a magic trick, it's something I know the secret of that others don't know yet. And so I'm a huge fan of secrets. And like I said, Siri means secret in Swahili. So I have started a company. I work usually for a couple of years before anyone even knows I'm working on something. And then and that gives me the time to really get it right and then launch it to the world. And we started with Siri, we started as literally our domain name was stealthcompany.com with a dash, so I could get the domain name cheap. So I'm working on something most recently, but I'm not ready to talk about it. I will describe one kind of, I know that a lot of your members are makers of a sort, and magicians in many cases are interested in magic. I will describe one my first maker magic invention that I created. That might be an interesting story.
Sure.
It was when I decided I was going to propose to my wife 25 years ago. And I knew her friends would want the story of, well, how did he ask you? What was it like? So I got in my head what I wanted to happen. I went to a magic store and I said, I want to buy the floating diamond ring trick, please. And they're like, oh no, we don't have that. We have this thing where, we can crumple a dollar bill on this invisible thread kind of thing, but it's light and it crumples and you can take it on. A ring would be super heavy and it would bounce up and down and you'd have to tie it on somehow if you had a thread or a string or something like that. So we can't help you. But I didn't give up. And I said, well, I see in my mind what I wanted to happen. I tried calling the restaurant. We were going to have our dating anniversary. And so I called the restaurant. I said, can I come in the afternoon? I want to reserve the table for the whole night. Should be that maybe I could rig something up if I know ahead of time. And they're like, oh, no, sir, we don't do that. You're just going to get a random table like everyone else. And I'm like, okay, this thing has to be completely portable, right? I have to have instant setup, completely portable. So I'm gathering all these requirements. And on the day of, the night of, we go to the restaurant at the right time in the dinner. I get down on my knee in front of her. I hold out my hand, open it up. There's a ring and it floats up out of my hand right in front of her. I could put my hands all around it. She could put her hands all around it. I asked her to marry me and I plucked it out of the air and put it on her finger. And I knew it had to be completely clean afterwards because she was going to look at this thing. So I had all these requirements. I couldn't, find an existing one. And so that was like one of my first magical maker creations where I had all of these constraints and I needed to figure out some method that didn't exist to make the magical dream in my head, become real. And she said yes. And here it is 25 years later. So it was a good effect. So it's not certainly the most recent thing I've been building, but it was one of my first maker and magic creations that I did, and I thought that might be of interest to your audience.
It is interesting. So that goes to prove the point that if you guys want to get secure the date or make her say yes, make sure you think it out like Adam did. Make sure you.
I was gonna say, a lot of times magicians get into magic because they think it's going to help them get girls or whatever. This might be the first time in the history of magic that it actually worked.
Well, that's actually you're predicting the future, because if you think about it from a woman's point of view, or whatever your partner, however you want to work it, the person would go, card trick or ring on the finger. I'll pass on the card trick. I'll pass on the 3 rows of 7. I'll pass on the coins across. But that ring thing sealed the deal for me.
Yeah.
Nice. There was a question that I don't normally ask that I'll put in here because you couldn't really answer due to secrecy of your new project. This is something I'm actually dying to ask you, because you were telling me about all these other things were passion projects while you had a job, like day job. How would you stay then motivated to work on these passion projects after spending all day at your day job? And I'm asking because oftentimes people work a day job that they hate and they feel drained by the time they get home and almost depressed, and they don't feel the creative impetus to start working on things. So how did that work for you?
Yeah. So the most productive time in my life was the period from really 2007 through 2010. And I actually started 3 companies at the same time. While I had a day job, and I literally started 3 companies and then finally left my day job and joined. So I was busy and I was juggling a lot. So here's how I did it. I took my work week and the calendar, and I literally designed a schedule that fit all my needs. So I had two main companies. I had, I'll call it an A company and a B company. So I wanted to do two things. I wanted to have enough time for sports. I think it's important to do some physical activity and enough time for family, right? So that was it. Company A, company B, sports and family. So here's what I did. I woke up every morning at 5 a.m. I had 2 hours from 5 to 7 for company B, my minor company. I then took a train ride, a 1-hour train ride from Oakland to San Jose, which was flex time. So I had a desk, I had Wi-Fi, I could work. So that time was either for company A or company B, depending on which one needed it more. I would get to the office. It's now 8 o'clock. I would work from 8 to about 5:30 on company A. Take the 1-hour trip back, and I'd get home around 7 o'clock. So flex time. So that means 2 hours a day. I have 2 hours every morning on company B. That's 10 hours a week during the weekdays. 10 hours of flex time that I can now put to company B or company A, and then a full 40 hours on company A. On the weekends, I would wake up at 6, sleep a little bit later. I would do 3 hours before my family generally woke up, where I would have company B. So that gave me another six hours in the morning. So every evening when I got home at 7, I'm off. That was family time, right? Help my son with his homework, have dinner, watch a little TV or whatever. Go to bed around 11. Every weekend, so the mornings, 3 hours each before the family woke up. And then I would have Saturday, it would be all family time. Sunday morning, I would do some sports. So I'd go play basketball for 2 or 3 hours, and then mostly family time. So I didn't really work I still had weekends. I still had enough family time, but I just carved it up. And the biggest thing where people, struggle is the context switching. They don't know what they should be working on and how, and when you, at the beginning, when you design such an ambitious schedule, it's hard, but after a couple of weeks of it, it becomes habit. You literally just adapt to it, right? And then you just drive through it for 2 years. It was like hyper productivity. I'm managing 2 companies plus family plus getting my 3 hours of basketball on Sunday. I have all weekend pretty much for family, every evening after 7 for family, and I still do these companies and manage to get, something like 26 hours a week for company B and 40 some hours for company A. And so I designed what worked for me, got it into the habit, and then just rode it out for 2-3 years. And that was the most productive I've ever been. So, I don't know if that helps.
It does certainly help because, so that explained how you were able to squeeze it all in. I guess the other part of my question was there a time that you felt demotivated to work on the creative side projects because you're more focused on earning a living with the main job? That's, I guess, what I was meaning by that.
Yeah. Usually when I get frustrated with my main job, my creative needs increase. And, so I was working on a great job. I was leading the largest AI project in U.S. government history. So $250 million project. But there were politics, and so I was kind of frustrated and feeling stifled. And that's what led me. I literally made what I call a verbally stated goal, a goal that I will tell everyone I meet. This is what I'm going to do now. I said, in 2007, I'm going to create 5 projects that can impact users in 2007. And I would tell you that if I went to a holiday party, hey, Adam, what are you doing? 5 projects that can impact users. And that need to create came because I was not that happy in my day job, right? But then my next goal was, out of those 5, take a major and a minor and make them, figure out how to make them my day job. And that's why I started companies, startups. And in fact, 3 of those projects The third one was change.org. So 3 of the projects started as companies at the same time. But now that they were I was passion projects turning into my day jobs, my 2 day jobs. I liked them, and I was all in on that. But, so I would say in life, there's an ebb and flow. Like there are chapters in your book of life. And if you're in a good spot and you're feeling happy and balanced and satisfied, my advice is write it out. Enjoy it as long as you can. But at some point, you're going to change. You can, people say even if you're in heaven, you'll get bored eventually, right? So at some point, you're going to change. You're going to have new needs, new growth you want, new frustrations from this, whatever. Mm-hmm. For me, those types of frustrations give me fuel for my side projects and passion. And then I can survive my day job because I'm also getting that, feeling creative and having an outlet. So it's not usually too hard to get the energy around that. And then I usually try to transition and see, how do I make this thing that I've been thinking about and building into what I do full time? And if you can do that, then you're happy again for a while.
Until the next disappointment, the next temporary ebb and flow.
Right, exactly.
Got it. All good points to be made. I hope my audience was listening to what he said, because I mean that stuff is really hits home, I think, to a lot of people, and it's very deep. It requires, I think, a lot of self-discovery, a lot of self-reflection on what do you really want out of life? What kind of impact do you want to make? And then lastly, how serious are you about making that impact? And like you just said, you purposely said, I'm going to wake up X amount of hours earlier to make sure I can get this in and still meet my other obligations and still make my family happy, because that's another common problem. People become obsessed with their projects and then they ignore their family. They ignore their health. They ignore things that are pretty high up on the priority list, and then it all kind of crumbles away. So really good points there made, Adam. Thank you. What about your favorite? What would you say is your favorite project that you've done in the past? I'm going to assume it's Siri, but I might be totally wrong.
I'm very proud of Siri. It's the most famous thing I've done, but it's and I put a lot of heart into it and loved it. But it's also one of my biggest failures. So because I imagined it to be so much more. And I think entrepreneurs are always unsatisfied, and that's what keeps them moving forward. If you're happy in life, if you think everything's great, there's no need to change anything. If you're frustrated and want to, so Siri was great, but I imagined the internet, the web. And even though Siri is famous, it's not really important unless you're visually impaired, paralyzed. There's a few kind of disabilities, disabled populations, autistic in certain cases. Then Siri is important. I have a magician friend who's blind, Richard Turner. He uses Siri for everything. It's his gateway to communicate to the world in the electronic world, right? So in general, I'm proud of Siri, but for most people, it's somewhat of a novelty, somewhat of a utility, but not important. Change.org for me is a much more important project. I'm very proud to have been there at the beginning of it. I was, Ben Rattray is the CEO and founder, and I was the first technical guy he met. I helped build the first version of the system, but all of the success, I was now off doing Siri. I can't take really any credit for what Change became, but I'm so proud of having been there at the start, because change is important. I mean, literally every hour of the day, maybe even every minute, there are victories that happen that matter to people, that changes their lives in big ways. And I can talk about some of those, but it's an incredibly powerful and important tool. So I'd say, what's the most important thing I've been associated with? I would pick change.org. Viv Labs, which I sold to Samsung, we got the technology onto hundreds of millions of devices. The technology was among the coolest we ever deployed. It was crazy how amazing what we built was. We built a system that when a user asks a Siri-like request, rather than just being a simple request that's hardwired, hand-coded in a programming language by a human, it was an AI who would write its own code on the fly to handle that request, which is like
crazy.
Which is crazy. And that means if I'm asking a question and you asking the same question, we may get very different behaviors because you have different preferences, you have different services that you care about. It's combining information from across different services. Nothing like that has ever been launched at internet scale, and we did it. Now, it didn't have the commercial success that Siri did, largely, I think, because there was zero advertising that Samsung put behind it and some various issues. So it wasn't as successful commercially, but from a technical point of view, wow, we did some amazing things. So I guess that's three answers. I'm very proud of what I did with Siri, and Siri was a lot of my vision, over the years. I contributed a lot to it, but I'm frustrated that it fell short. The version people had. Change.org, I didn't have that much contribution, but I'm so proud to have been part of it at the beginning, earliest days. That is powerful and important. And then Viv Labs, some of the coolest technology I think ever created, and the travesty is most people won't know about it because it's not marketed well, and then people left and it fell away. So I felt the opportunity, but just from the pure, maybe I'd say maker, creative feel, I'm like, wow, there was some unbelievable stuff we did in that. So there's three answers.
Which is something I think that Steve Jobs knew a thing or two about from the whole marketing standpoint. Never having met him,
yes, he did.
I did read his big, thick book about him, the autobiography or whatever.
Yeah, Walter Isaacson, yeah.
Yeah, and he was marketing-wise just as much of a genius as he was with all the software and hardware.
More so. He was not really the technical guy, although he was quite technical savvy. But remember, Steve Wozniak was the guy who built the Apple computer. Steve Jobs marketed it. Steve is a magician. And when you went to a product reveal,
yes,
you were not going to a technology show. There were no dashboards where here are the competition, here are the features. We do check, the competition does check, but we do all the checks, none of that. When you went, people talked about Steve's aura, and it was all about emotion. And what is magic about? Magic is the feeling of wonder, right? That's one of the definitions of magic. It's when you experience a feeling of wonder. And Steve brought that into, using technology, but he brought that to people, and it was literally a magic show. I got to work with Steve Jobs for 18 months before he died. Actually, Siri launched October 4th, 2011. Steve Jobs died the very next day. And his admin wrote and said he cared so much about Siri, he was clinging to life to see the launch of Siri. I mean, he was holding on to see it. But when people ask me, who reminds you most of Steve Jobs? I think people would be surprised with my answer. I say David Copperfield. And both of them are billionaires.
Yeah.
Both of them are, they're obsessive to create great things. And both of them don't really live on their past. I know that David he still has this need and desire to push forward to greatness going forward. And Steve Jobs, like the first day I met him, he didn't care that he had reinvented the computing industry, the music industry, the film industry. That was all in the past. He was desperate to succeed. There was a fire burning in him to do something important. And I think David Copperfield has that. But for me, those elements, the magician in him and the desire to be great and important, are two things that, for me, David Copperfield and Steve Jobs, they're very similar in that way.
Yeah, they're both perfectionists.
Yes.
And that's how perfectionists operate. And yeah, their results, their work speaks for itself.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about different successes of Adam Cheyer, and you touched a little bit on some failures, but I know you said you don't like to use that word, and I totally understand why after what you said. Is there any project that you're okay talking about that you would say, because I don't like to sugarcoat the whole creativity, entrepreneur, and romanticize, because it's already romanticized enough, and it's like, oh yeah, just start a company like magic and you'll have this passive income rolling in and just, put your head back and lean on your chair and at the beach and everything will be okay.
Yeah.
So with that being said, is there any project that just totally blew up in your face and was just like this big epic dumpster fire thing that you're okay with sharing? It's just you had to abandon?
Well, there have been times when I thought something would happen. So in 2004, I made 10 predictions for the future. I talked about trends and triggers. And then 10 years later, so I said 10 predictions for the next 10 years. 10 years later, I stood up on stage and I scored myself on how I did with my predictions. So it's not like a company I did. So it turns out my best 3 predictions made in 2004 directly translated to companies. So number 1, I said in 2004, which was non-obvious, I said social networking is going to take off and go mainstream. Now, at the time, I'd never heard of Facebook. LinkedIn was kind of niche and just for workers. And there was Friendster that had about 13 million, but it wasn't a big deal. So that was like a bold claim. And I wasn't sure in it, but I had my reasons and I put that out there as one of my predictions. I talked about big data, like data moving to the cloud and machine learning. Once you get all the data together, machine learning would now take off in a way that it never could have before. So that was a prediction. And then I had this whole thing about a virtual personal assistant that was going to, help you manage all your information. So those were my 3 best predictions. But there were other predictions that I was like so confident in. I was like, oh, well, I don't know about that crazy social networking idea. That seems iffy. But there were some that I was sure made all the sense in the world. And yet, even today, 18 years later, still haven't come to fruition. So in a sense, it's a dumpster fire of a prediction.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just not the right time yet and it will happen. One of them was, back in 2004, Netflix was doing recommendations, but it was always based on what everyone thought. We think people, everyone has voted. It was called recommendation engines or personalized learning. If you like this, you're going to like that.
Yeah.
For the mass. Okay, that's good. And I believed in social networking because it's about peer-to-peer relationships. I know you're an expert maker. I know you're an expert magician. If you tell me a maker thing or a magic thing, I'm going to believe it a lot more than some other one who's not as skilled in those areas, right? Okay. So for me, I thought social networking was all about your trust relationships along different dimensions. So my prediction was, of course, those 2 things would merge. meaning I don't care what most people think. I want to get recommendations from people I know and that I trust in certain dimensions. If I have a friend who's a foodie, I want to get food recommendations from that person. If I have a friend who's an expert magician, I want to get magic recommendations from that person. So I thought by this point in time, all of those recommendations and suggestions, and even that, would be mediated through my social network and my trust relationships. Hasn't happened. I mean, what we get instead is like spam bots filling up, Amazon and Yelp, for everyone. We have social networks that took off, but it doesn't influence the ads or the recommendations or suggestions that I'm seeing hardly at all. So I'm looking, man, I was so sure. Like it just made so much sense to me. It didn't happen. So there's an example of, I still think it's a good idea. I still don't know why it's not the case. Mm-hmm. Maybe it just hasn't happened yet. So that's why I say it's not a failure. It's just a surprise or a learning that it hasn't happened yet.
I wish I had that kind of life where if that's like the one, like if that was a dumpster fire failure for me, I would be thrilled because I've had far worse unfortunate things happen.
I've done demos that have failed. I'm a magician. I've done magic tricks on stage. I'll give you a dumpster fire magic thing.
Sure.
During COVID, I watched 150 virtual shows in a year and a half, probably more than any living human. I was averaging 4 or 5, because magicians don't have the time. They need to work on their craft. And regular humans don't watch 5 magic shows a week for a
Correct.
year. Right. But I performed a few. And so I did a magic, I was asked to perform magic on a virtual show. And in the audience for that show, I had Jeff McBride, one of the greatest magic teachers in the world.
Right.
Kevin James, one of the greatest magic inventors in the world. David Copperfield, listed as the magician of the century, watching on that virtual show and more. I had 4 effects to perform, and 3 of them died spectacularly.
Oh,
just like no recovery. No recovery other than smile, nod, and keep going, right? 3 out of 4 failures with Copperfield, McBride, and Kevin James watching.
Ouch.
But, I don't dwell on those. The funny part was afterwards, David Copperfield felt so bad, I think. He called me on the phone and started telling me about all the worst dumpster fire moments he's had in magic. And that was like the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
So in a way, it was a bad experience to fail so spectacularly in magic in front of such important people. And yet it was such a wonderful moment afterwards. He told me on one of his shows, he literally cut off his finger in the middle of a show, picked it up and said, "I've got to go to the hospital now." And I go, "At least I've got all my fingers."
Dang.
So, there's always going to be dumpster fires in the tech and, magic and, little things will go wrong or else you're not trying, right? It's not like that has never happened to me. But for me, it's more like these are big vision kind, like if I had clarity of vision and I was wrong, it turned out I didn't start a company in that area. Maybe if I had, it would have made the thing come true. Just like I imagined there would be a Siri and then I went and created Siri. Or maybe it's still just a wrong, bad idea and I would have gone down that path and failed. But so for me, I picked that one as like, man, I was so sure enough to do something about it. I didn't. So it didn't turn out that badly. But anyway.
Yeah.
About failure.
No, and that just reminds us all about the duality of everything. Just starting with your magic trick experience, you basically earned the subsequent phone call basically by the sweat, blood, and tears that were shed during that performance. But that's turned out to be a really good thing. I mean, who else would get a call like that and just really get that kind of personal?
Yeah, it was wonderful.
And I'm sure it inspired you to take whatever you were working on up 10 more notches after hearing what you heard. So it's not all bad, folks. We can.
Yeah, I don't regret. So obviously in that show, I didn't go with safe things. I could have gone safe, and I was trying new inventions, new technical creations, and you're stuck in COVID, and I didn't have a ton of time to perfect and perform. So I took a risk, and it was high risk, high reward. And sometimes your risks fail, and you have to be prepared to accept the failure if it fails. But I don't regret having tried it, and I so again, it was a forget the word you used, but it was a spectacular failure. But it was a good experience all in all.
Awesome. No, that's great to hear all that. That's really great to hear. And when you are creating these wonderful pieces of tech wizardry, I'm sure you've had times where you have these happy accidents. And I always like to bring these up with my guests because I have a number of stories. Matt King and other performers have stories of they're interacting with audience members, and then the audience member says something that they weren't expecting. And then they respond ad lib, and it gets a great reaction. And then, like Matt King would say, I got to keep this in the show, and I got to know, just work it into my script so it happens every time. Yeah. So is there anything, Adam, that you've created by accident that turned out to be this spectacular success?
I'll give one Siri story.
Sure.
That I think is kind of funny. So when we were a startup, and that was acquired by Apple. And the original Siri did all these domains. You could say, find restaurants, or get the weather, or get my flight information, whatever. 15 different domains. But we saw early on that people wanted to ask Siri other questions, like, Siri, do you love me? Siri, what color are your eyes? Siri, whatever. Mm-hmm. Which is not the 15 domains or the functional things we were anticipating. So I had written these little handlers, kind of like, yeah, get back to work, kind of like, pretty boring answers, but I had to have handlers because people would ask these questions. The system needed to say something. So then we go to Apple, and we had the idea of sprinkling surprise and delight into the system. So the idea was, you wouldn't just say, if you said, what's the weather? It wouldn't just say it's raining or it's going to rain tomorrow. It would say it's going to rain tomorrow. Don't forget your galoshes. Like you would add a little extra spice, a little extra humanness or, surprise and delight into the interaction. So we hired a guy whose job was to go through our functional domains and sprinkle in a little what we call delight nuggets. Huh. And he came across all of my handlers for these funny, and he goes, well, none of these responses are funny. And he just cleaned them up. And so the surprising thing is that when Siri launched on Apple's phones, Apple was not aware of all of the personality and humor and funny things that was in Siri. Because the QA, like all of the spreadsheets testing, we need to test this and test that, and was all about weather and timers and maps and whatever. So no one was testing or really thinking about those between the cracks moments. So Siri came out and someone said, what color are your eyes? Or will you marry me? And then all of a sudden Siri said something funny and people loved it. and it went viral. And so on late night TV shows, David Letterman, all this kind of stuff, they're talking to Siri and what cool things can you make Siri? And Apple freaked. They had no idea this was in there. They like to control their message.
Yeah.
And this was like coming out of the blue. So in a way, it was an accident. It was me who had written these little handlers. Someone else came along and sprinkled in funny responses. No one was really aware, but it really made Siri, right? Mm-hmm. And part of the reason it went viral, I think, was because of that humor and character that it had. And then the next 2 quarters, the next 6 months, just selling the iPhone 4S, which was the iPhone 4 plus Siri, Apple broke every profit margin record. Their stock price almost doubled. They passed Exxon to become the most valuable company in the world. So in a way, you could say this was sort of like a happy accident, to your question, that wasn't exactly anticipated or planned for, and Apple didn't even know it was in there. And yet, boom, through the roof sales, margins, and fame. So yeah, there's an example of sort of an unexpected, happy accident side effect that changed the world in some ways.
That's hilarious and awesome at the same time, because I myself am still discovering new responses from Siri, and it reminds me, did it ever come across you when you guys were coming up with Siri, like the Magic 8 Ball? Remember the classic Magic 8 Ball?
I remember. Yeah, I don't know if that's in there or not, but it might be.
Just reminded me like that the Magic 8 Ball is kind of like the low-tech original
version of Siri, yeah.
Question and answer, but it's like a little die inside. So you probably get like 8 responses where Siri's
would always be something like, it may be so, or definitively not. And you would ask some question, shake it up, and it would give you like a coin flip, but with more character.
Exactly. That's see, the overarching thing that we all can learn from this, my listeners, viewers, is like, you should probably like, right? I think it's like kind of like, if you think it's a good idea, why not test it? Why not, why not make whatever product or service you're coming up with, try different features, right? Put in different features that you might think are insignificant, but then all of a sudden through testing, your audience just goes, hey, this is it. This is great. And then you go, wait a minute, I wasn't expecting that. And then you keep it.
And sometimes I would say 2 things. One is people want to relate to their software a little bit more. Right? Yeah. So if you can find ways to make, software, you're like, I'm just a business application. But even through a GUI, software has personality, even if it's the absence of personality. So thinking of the thing you're creating, whether it's software or maybe if it's hardware or whatever it is, asking yourself, what persona, what personality do I want this to have? Is it fun? Is it sober? Is it, business? With Siri, we had to design a whole backstory and answer questions like, is Siri a man, a woman, or a computer, or an AI? Does it know, is it, or an extraterrestrial, right? What is it? Is it an Apple employee, a fan of Apple, or does it not know about Apple specially? All of these things were like this backstory. How old is Siri? Where did it come from? So we needed to answer these things. Now, if you're building a device or a business application, maybe you don't have to know, is it a man or a woman, right? But it does have a personality and people want to relate and react to it. And so spending time on that aspect, the feel of it, like making it more cute, making it more serious, that it will have more impact than you might expect. And like I said, with Siri, our conversation designer got it just about right. and it resonated, and then boom, greatest profits ever in technology history, right? So I guess that's one thing to think about, is what you're building. What is its personality? What is it saying? And spending a little more time thinking and polishing that might pay dividends.
Agreed. Like a magician, when a magician is creating a routine, oftentimes you talk about the internal dialogue that the magician is having, and then you take it even further. What's the internal dialogue between you and the prop that you are manipulating? And the prop can have its own personality and dialogue with the magician, the performer. Same thing goes to say with, just to bring this more to the real world 9-to-5ers, any product that doesn't have a human behind it, like a product that would normally seem boring, try to think of what, like you said, personality you can give it. Another good example that I could think, not the world's greatest, but it's something that I remember growing up as a millennial playing with Windows 95 in the early 90s, the little paperclip inside of Microsoft Word, that little paperclip character.
Yeah, Clippy.
Clippy was like when I was like 3 or 4, messing around on my dad's computer. I didn't care about Microsoft Word. I cared about talking to the paperclip.
But there's an example of getting it wrong.
Okay.
It's wrong.
Please elaborate.
People don't know this, but the first viral video, this was before YouTube, before this, the first viral video was an I hate Clippy video, ever, of any type. And people got so against and angry at Clippy. And it's still like decades later, a punchline. But there is some visceral anti-Clippy reaction. And it's because it's just that thing. They're trying to get the persona, the personality right. And people want to engage. When you first see Clippy, you want to connect. But if you don't get it right, instead of being a positive, like profit margin through the roof, it can go the other way. You get it wrong, people will hate your product and will, as we saw, tell people in a viral way online that they hate your product. So that personality design is a little tricky and, a little dangerous, but it can have huge reward or huge risk.
I'm glad I brought that up because
great one.
I was trying to, be all positive and be like, you make this personality and it's going to help. But like, as you said, not always the case. You have to design. You have to spend a lot of time on that personality. Probably, I'm willing to bet y'all spend a lot of time beta testing different responses and questions. And
we actually didn't much.
No?
We happened to get a really great designer. Okay. And as I said, the reason it wasn't tested is Apple didn't even know it was in there.
Okay.
Surprisingly. But we got someone who he came up with the right tone.
Timing again.
Yeah, he just had the right feel, and somehow the personality that he created resonated. It wasn't brash, wasn't overly promising. It had just this subtle, self-deprecating kind of humor in certain ways. There was something about it, that it just hit on. And then there were many assistants. There's a well-known, I think Stephen King, well-known author. I think Stephen King wrote, Alexa and Google Assistant try to be hip, but they're not. Siri actually pulls it off sometimes. Like he had a comment along those lines. I'll have to look it up. But, you can have the best designers at Google and Amazon who are great. It's hard to get it just right. I would say all kudos goes to the designer who's in charge of that. If he's listening, he knows who he is out there. I won't share his name. But, he did an amazing job, and it paid off big.
Well, if you don't mind me asking, was it a comedy writer that was doing the writing of this, or just somebody who wasn't? You just happened to get it right?
Yeah, he's a user experience designer. He had worked at Apple long ago, and so this was like a return to Apple for him. So it's kind of a back to his roots. Um, but he's just, he's an intelligent, well-spoken, he's funny, but he's not a professional comic. He's not a professional writer that I know. But he's a user experience designer who's extremely thoughtful, pretty well educated, Berkeley, um, you know. Anyway, but he just got it right. As far as I know, he's still at Apple and still leading the team around personality design.
Okay. And I'll just, you already know this, but just for my viewers and listeners that aren't aware, you mentioned a term, GUI. That's graphical user interface, right?
Okay. Yes, that's right. Thank you.
Just wanted to go, because I remember reading about that and learning about it. The graphical user interface, just basically the user experience, what the user sees and interacts with visually, right?
Yeah. Like you talked about, Windows 95, those windows that we're looking at on our computer every day, that's all part of the GUI, the graphical user interface. The mouse, the windows, the buttons.
Got it. Okay. So, all good stuff, Adam. I always also ask my guests too, is there anyone that inspired you to follow the path that you have chosen in life? Like so in your case, software, are there any software wizards that just really got you going, or was this just something that you were naturally drawn to?
Yeah, I'd like to give a shout out to a mentor who actually is the inventor of the GUI. So good segue there. His name was Doug Engelbart. And if I were to tell you, if you were to say who's the greatest software creator of all time, I'd say maybe the person who invented the personal computer, like the Windows, the mouse, who would that be? Is it Steve Jobs or maybe it's Bill Gates? If I said, wow, think about the web. The web is one of the most important computer things we have. Hyperlinks, multimedia documents distributed around the world and web pages. Who invented that? Sometimes people say Tim Berners-Lee. Video conferencing like we're doing now, right? Or share all this collaboration technology that we've been using in this past year. Who's the creator of that? Is it maybe, I don't know, Skype guys or whatever? Well, what if I told you that all of these inventions were created by one man? His name is Doug Engelbart. In 1962, he had the patent for the mouse. At a time when computers were driven by holes punched into cards and fed into slot readers, he built the first interactive terminals with graphical user interfaces that you could have windows, multiple windows, text editors. He took computing from a non-interactive medium into an interactive medium. He also created everything that we have in the web, multimedia documents, hyperlinks, all the collaboration technologies, and it was all beautifully integrated into one system. So he's by far the most, in my view, impactful person in the history of computing. But here's the reason why I want to shout him out. Why did he create all this technology? And this will be a great point to kind of close on. He said in the 60s, someday the world is going to be faced with complex, urgent problems. And he listed them: pandemic, climate change, hunger, poverty, human rights, animal rights, water, pollution, etc. He said, unless we get better as a species at what he called collective intelligence, we will not survive. And he thought that computers could augment human intellect, that could help us think better and smarter and deeper together about not only small problems, but the world's biggest problems, right? These pandemics and climate change, etc. And that's why he created the mouse, multiple windows, graphical interfaces, the web, video conferencing and more, was to help us think more. So for me, it's been a challenge of mine, and I think he left it for all of us to, find ways to build things that will help us solve these world problems. He died a few years ago. Even though so much of his vision had come true, he still was frustrated that now we all had a supercomputer on our desk with graphical interfaces and a mouse and the web, but we're still, in his assessment, not able to think about the big problems any better. And so his challenge is yet unfulfilled, but it's kind of over to us to pick up the challenge, to build on the work that he created, and to help us figure this out. So that's
wow.
the person who I think most inspired me to do what I do.
Amazing. And besides a person, was there any what that inspired you to start writing this custom software? Because I'm going to assume that when you were much younger, like just going to school, or maybe I'm totally wrong, was this something that started as a child and just you following through?
Like I said, I was 14 with the Rubik's Cube, and I was so interested in Rubik's Cube, I wanted to figure out how could I do a Rubik's Cube thing with this computer. But once I learned software programming and how much of a creative medium it is, and how I could solve any problem, build or any dream, make it come true.
Yeah.
I just fell in love with software. So I've been doing that all the way. And then when I met Doug, it really shaped, in the early 90s, really shaped my views about what should I spend my career on. And so for me, things like change.org, which I've been involved with, is kind of a Doug-inspired project. How do you harness the collective IQ of the world to solve lots of problems? Well, change.org is one approach to doing that. So, so I fell in love as a teenager with software, and been inspired by Doug, in the early 90s to try to help people do more, think better, accomplish tasks better. And everything I've done, from Siri to change.org to Viv, it's all about trying to help individuals and groups of people be more and think more and do more efficiently.
And by Doug, was Doug somebody that you already named, first and last name? I just want
Doug Engelbart. So that's the creator of the mouse.
Got it.
You can learn about him, I think, at dougengelbart.org. If you want to see, he did a magic show of sorts in 1968. He did for the National Computer Society. He presented something that was so revolutionary, half the audience thought it was a hoax. And the other half of the audience had their lives changed forever. And the way to look this up, it's on the web and you can see it. It's 90 minutes. He does not have the charisma of a Steve Jobs, but you look it up by typing into Google or whatever, the mother of all demos. The mother of all demos. And it was Steve Jobs in 1968. You have to put yourself in the framework that computers were punch card machines.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's black and white and it's a little bit dry presentation, but he shows things that we don't have today. And it was working back then, and it was miraculous.
Okay, that is definitely something I'll be looking up, and I'll make sure that gets put in the show notes as well.
Right.
Which is a perfect segue as we wrap things up, Adam. Are there any other resources that you could recommend for people who are interested in getting into making magic with software and getting inspired that way? And then after that, please tell everybody where they can find more about you.
Sure. In the maker and magic field, I'm sure you've met Mario, the maker magician.
Fantastic. He was the first guest on this podcast 2 years ago.
He's the perfect guest for this podcast. He's a hero of mine. He's recently written a book all about building robots, really interesting robots. So I think that's a great resource for people who want to be creators and builders. So yeah, so I would say for magic and maker kind of things, I'm going to point people, go find Mario's latest book. It's wonderful. In terms of, definitely go check out Doug Engelbart and dougengelbart.org and the Mother of All Demos. I'm hoping people out there will be inspired to create software, hardware, or whatever that can help humanity face some of the complex urgent issues we're going to be dealt with. And if you want to learn more about me or follow what I'm doing, I have my homepage is adam.cheyer.com. So first name, last name. Cheyer is Cheyer. So, you'll be able to see some of my technical creations there, my magical creations there, and just follow along on the little things I do.
Excellent. And it's Cheyer, so I want to get that right.
That's correct.
Got it. Okay. I had earlier was saying it a little differently, and I'm sure that happens a lot. I want to make sure I get this right.
Yeah, you've heard it from the source.
From the source, it's Adam Cheyer, and got it. And with all that being said, folks, man, my mind is definitely expanded. You just heard from the co-founder of Siri, Viv Labs, one of the members of change.org, and there was one more amazing thing, the Sentient, yes, the machine learning company. Wow. A lot of food for thought for people here. And Adam, I just want to thank you again for taking the time to be on the Making Magic podcast. And thank you all for watching and listening. And if you guys enjoyed this, feel free to subscribe, click the thumbs up, notification bells. You all know what to do. And feel free to enjoy this as well on the Apple Podcast app and all the other popular podcast platforms. So y'all have been listening to and watching another episode of the Making Magic podcast, and we'll see you guys on the next one.